At 6:35 on June 11, 1945, Lieutenant Richard McCool stood in the conning tower of USS LCS 122, eyes fixed on the radar plot and the broken clouds ahead. 3 Japanese Val dive bombers were closing fast, 65 miles north of Okinawa. McCool was 23 years old. 6 weeks on radar picket station 15. 0 ships lost under his command. In the last 72 hours alone, the Japanese had thrown 18 kamikazes at his station. LCS 122 was not a destroyer. She was a landing craft support, 158 feet long, 23 feet wide, crew of 65. The fleet called ships like hers pallbearers. They didn't hunt submarines or dual enemy cruisers. They existed for one purpose only: to stand between suicide aircraft and the radar ships that warned Okinawa of incoming death. 5 twin 40mm Bofors mounts. For 20mm cannons. 120 rockets packed in deck launchers. If fire reached those rockets, the ship would vanish in seconds. The Battle of Okinawa was already in its 3rd month. More than 12,000 Americans were dead. Japanese kamikaze pilots had sunk 36 Allied ships and damaged 368 more. Radar picket duty was the most lethal assignment in the Pacific. The destroyers carried the radar. The LCS ships carried the guns and took the hits. Station 15 sat northwest of Okinawa, closest to the Japanese home islands. It was always hit first. McCool's ship had been on station since May 10th. Every day brought attacks. Every night brought alarms. The crew slept in fragments, minutes at a time, boots on, helmets nearby. Just 24 hours earlier, McCool had watched another kamikaze nearly kill an entire destroyer. June 10th, 8:15. A lone Val burst through the clouds and dove straight at USS William D. Porter, a Fletcher-class destroyer with 273 men aboard. 5-inch guns and 40mm batteries tore into the plane. It took hit after hit, kept coming anyway. The destroyer turned hard to starboard. The kamikaze missed by 30 feet and then exploded under the ship. The blast lifted Porter completely out of the water. Steam lines ruptured. Power failed. Fires erupted in 3 compartments. Within minutes, she listed badly to starboard. Her crew fought the damage for 3 hours. Pumps failed. Flooding spread. At 11 o'clock, the captain gave the order to abandon ship. McCool brought LCS 122 alongside the burning destroyer. Nearly 300 men needed evacuation. His crew worked without pause, pulling sailors from the water, treating burns, loading the wounded onto stretchers. 12 minutes after the last man stepped off, William D. Porter rolled over and sank stern first. No fatalities. McCool's crew had saved every soul aboard. The task force commander praised the rescue. But the Japanese noticed something else. They now knew Station 15. They knew which ships rushed toward the burning. They knew LCS 122 carried firepower, and that her young commander did not retreat. June 11th came with clear skies and perfect visibility. McCool's ship held the northernmost point of a diamond formation. 3 other LCS vessels lay south of him. The nearest destroyer sat 3 miles away. If kamikazes came from the north, LCS 122 would be hit first. At 1800 hours, the radar operator's voice cut through the calm. Multiple contacts. Bearing 350. Range 12 miles. Closing fast. McCool ordered general quarters. 65 men ran to their stations. 40mm crews slammed fresh ammo drums into place. 20mm gunners checked their sights. Below decks, damage control teams stood ready with foam and hoses. Everyone knew the drill. Everyone knew the odds. 3 Val dive bombers burst through the clouds at 6,000 feet and came in low and fast. McCool's gunners opened fire at 4,000 yards. The lead Val took hits across wings and fuselage. Smoke trailed behind it. Control surfaces shredded. Still it flew. The plane roared over the forward deck house, 8 feet above it. Its landing gear nearly clipped the number 1 40mm mount. The gunner ducked instinctively. The kamikaze slammed into the water 100 yards off the port bow and exploded. Water and debris shot 200 feet into the air. McCool snapped his attention to the remaining 2 aircraft. The second Val dove from starboard. All 5 40mm mounts tracked it. Guns 2, 3, 5, and 7 poured fire into the aircraft. Tracers shredded the cockpit canopy. The greenhouse shattered. The engine belched thick black smoke. The pilot never pulled out. The third valve stayed high, circling, waiting. The second attacker closed to 1,000 yards. Then 500. The 20mm cannons joined in. Every gun on the ship fired. Shell casings carpeted the deck. The sound became a single, continuous roar. The valve's left wing caught fire. Pieces tore away midair. The aircraft wobbled, but stayed on course. It was aimed straight at the conning tower. At 200 yards, McCool saw the pilot clearly. Young, maybe 20. A white headband tied across his forehead. A 500-pound bomb hung beneath the fuselage, contact fused. If it detonated on impact, LCS-122 would cease to exist. McCool braced. The valve slammed into the starboard side at the base of the conning tower. Metal screamed. The fuselage crumpled. The bomb punched through the radio shack and out the opposite side of the ship, then detonated in the water. The blast hit the hull from outside. That single detail saved the ship. Fire did not. Burning aviation fuel washed across the deck. The radio shack erupted in flames. Ammunition began cooking off. 20mm rounds exploded at random. Pyrotechnic flares ignited. White phosphorus burned at 4,000 degrees. The conning tower filled with heat and smoke. The blast knocked McCool unconscious. When he came to, seconds or minutes later, he was alone. Everyone else had been blown clear or killed. He tried to stand. His right side wouldn't respond. He looked down. His uniform was shredded. Blood soaked through. Burns covered his arm and torso. Shrapnel had torn into him in multiple places. Below, the fire roared. Ammunition cracked. Men screamed. He reached the ladder. His legs barely worked. Gripping the rail with his left hand, he lowered himself down, every movement sending knives of pain through his chest. He dropped onto the main deck. Fire raged amidships, moving steadily toward the rocket launchers. 120 rockets. If they ignited, there would be nothing left to save. McCool found his chief engineer near the forward gun mount, face black with soot. He gave orders through clenched teeth. Flood the forward magazines. Seal the aft compartments. Keep water on those rockets. The engineer nodded and ran. McCool moved aft. Each step took everything he had. His right lung felt heavy, like breathing through water. He looked back at the conning tower, now fully engulfed. Then he saw movement inside. 2 men were trapped in the burning deck house. The fire was advancing, 30 feet from the rockets. 20. McCool had seconds. Save the men, or protect the ship. He turned toward the flames. He pushed into the smoke. The heat hit him like a wall. His burn screamed. Every breath drew fire into his damaged lung. Blood coated his tongue. He reached the deck house doorway. Twisted metal blocked it. Flames poured from inside. 1 man lay pinned beneath debris. Another crouched beside him, trying to lift a collapsed beam. They had maybe 30 seconds. McCool grabbed the warped doorframe. The steel burned through what remained of his gloves. He pulled. Nothing. His right arm failed him. He shifted his grip, used his left hand, and threw his full weight backward. The metal tore free. The doorway finally gave way. Lieutenant Richard McCool stumbled forward into the compartment and vanished into smoke and heat. Visibility dropped to nothing. The air burned his throat. Instinct drove him down to his knees. There was always a thin layer of breathable air close to the deck. He crawled blind. His left hand found cloth. Skin. A human body. The first sailor was conscious, barely. His face was blistered raw, eyes wide with shock. He was pinned beneath a collapsed section of bulkhead. McCool tried to lift it. His right side didn't respond. The beam didn't move. A second sailor crawled in beside him, coughing violently. Together they heaved. 6 inches. 8. Enough. The trapped man dragged himself free, legs crushed and useless. McCool hooked his left arm under the sailor's shoulders and began pulling him toward the doorway. Every movement sent knives of pain through his chest. His breathing turned wet, uneven. He coughed. Blood came up, dark and frothy. A collapsed lung. Maybe worse. He kept moving. Hands reached in from outside and hauled the injured sailor clear. 1 rescued. McCool turned back into the smoke without hesitation. The second sailor had found his own way out. He emerged moments later, burned, disoriented, but alive. 2 rescued. McCool tried to stand. His chest folded inward. Air wouldn't come. The world narrowed to a gray tunnel. The chief engineer grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away from the flames. McCool tore free and pointed, not at himself, but toward the rocket launchers. The engineer understood instantly and ran. Water slammed onto the rockets from 3 hoses at once. For the moment, the fire stopped advancing. McCool lifted his head and scanned the sky. The third valve was still there, banking, turning, coming back. The surviving gun crew saw it too. The undamaged mounts swung skyward, but half the ship's firepower was gone. Forward guns were destroyed. Midships mounts were swallowed by fire. Only the aft weapons remained. Not enough. McCool tried to move toward the aft gun director. His legs failed. He collapsed onto the deck. His chest filled again. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. He raised a shaking arm and pointed weakly upward. The chief engineer followed his gaze. The valve dropped from 4,000 feet, smoke streaming from its engine. The pilot could see everything: the fires, the chaos, the exposed rockets. A crippled ship. An easy kill. The aft 40mm opened fire. Tracers climbed. They struck home. Pieces tore from the aircraft. Flames crawled along its wing. The kamikaze kept coming. 500 yards. 300. Men dove for cover. The dive line carried the aircraft straight toward the burning midships, straight toward the rockets. Gun 7 tracked the descent. The gunner fired in long, desperate bursts. 50 rounds. 75. Tracers stitched the fuselage. The valve's right wing erupted in flame. The aircraft shuddered. The dive steepened, too steep. Control was gone. It missed the ship by 40 yards. The bomber slammed into the sea off the starboard quarter and detonated, throwing a column of water and debris higher than the mast. No secondary explosion. The rockets were still intact. McCool tried to breathe again. Failed. Blood flooded his mouth. Froth. His right lung had collapsed completely. He was drowning on dry steel. The fires still burned midships. Damage control fought them with everything. Hoses, foam, buckets passed hand to hand. Primitive. Desperate. And slowly, it worked. The flames stalled, then began to retreat. McCool lay on the deck, unable to move, counting bodies. 12 dead. 23 wounded. The lone corpsman worked without pause, triaging the worst cases aft. The walking wounded helped fight the fires. From first radar contact to the final explosion, the battle had lasted 11 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Shock set in. McCool knew he was dying. Then another ship cut through the smoke. LCS 84. She came alongside with care. Her captain took in the devastation in seconds and ordered medical assistance across immediately. 2 corpsmen jumped over with plasma and stretchers. They went straight to McCool. Collapsed lung. Severe burns. Multiple shrapnel wounds. Internal bleeding. He needed surgery, real surgery. McCool tried to resist as they lifted him, pointing weakly toward his wounded crew. They ignored him. The captain goes first, the corpsman said. They carried him across in 3 careful minutes. Calm seas, luck again. McCool looked back at LCS 122. She was still afloat, still fighting. His crew lined the rail. Some saluted. Some cried. They laid him on a bunk aboard LCS 84, cutting away what remained of his uniform. In proper light, the damage was worse. 3rd-degree burns, metal embedded in flesh, blood everywhere. Morphine dulled the pain, but not the fear. He drifted in and out of consciousness, hearing voices, quiet ones. Not expected to survive. Too much damage. They were wrong. 2 hours later, a destroyer arrived. USS Cassinyoung. Real doctors. Real operating rooms. The transfer was brutal. 3-foot swells. The stretcher swung dangerously as they hoisted him across. At 2200 hours, Richard McCool reached the destroyer's sick bay. The chief medical officer took one look and moved fast. Collapsed lung. Internal hemorrhage. Severe burns. Shrapnel everywhere. Blood pressure falling. Shock advancing. He shouldn't have lived. But he would. They moved McCool into the destroyer's medical bay. Corpsmen cut away the scorched field dressings. The burns underneath were already blistering, angry, wet, and deep. Without proper treatment, infection was inevitable. The medical officer ordered plasma immediately, antibiotics, sulfa powder packed into the burns. Then he examined the shrapnel wounds. 7 entry points. For exits, 3 fragments still inside. 1 near the spine, 1 in the shoulder, 1 somewhere deep in the abdomen. X-rays would be needed to locate them precisely. There were no X-rays on a destroyer. The collapsed lung came first. No anesthesia. McCool was too unstable. Too much blood loss. The doctor inserted the chest tube between McCool's ribs. McCool arched involuntarily. No scream. There wasn't enough air for one. Blood and air rushed through the tube immediately. The lung began to re-expand, slowly, partially. The damage was extensive. Back at Radar Picket Station 15, LCS 122 was still burning. 3 hours after the attack, the fires were finally contained. Not out, contained. Hot spots smoldered through the midships section. Damage control teams stood watch with hoses and foam at the ready. The rocket launchers were intact. The forward magazine was sealed and undamaged. The ship would not explode. The conning tower was gone. Twisted steel, melted instruments, charred remains. 4 men had died there instantly. The radio shack no longer existed. LCS 122 could receive messages, but could not transmit. She could fight, but she could not call for help. Damage assessment continued until dawn. 12 dead. 23 wounded requiring evacuation. 15 lightly injured who stayed on duty. The hull was compromised but sound. Engines worked. Steering responded. Combat capability was badly reduced. A repair vessel arrived at 0600 on June 12. Emergency shoring began. Cutting, welding, reinforcing bulkheads. Not restoration. Just survival. Get her off the picket line. Get her crew out alive. McCool remained aboard USS Cassin Young through the night. The doctor checked him hourly. His blood pressure stabilized slightly. Breathing improved, but only marginally. The chest tube kept draining. Too much blood. Too much fluid. Torn lung tissue. Surgery was unavoidable. At 0830, the hospital ship USS Solace was scheduled to arrive. She was 17 hours away. The doctor didn't believe McCool had 17 hours. Internal bleeding continued. The lung refused to fully recover. Fever climbed, 101, 102 degrees. Sepsis was starting. Without surgical intervention, he might have a day, maybe less. The doctor sat beside McCool's bunk, checking his pulse. Weak, thready, irregular. 23 years old. The same officer who had saved nearly 300 sailors from the William D. Porter. The same man who had just saved his own crew while mortally wounded. Now dying on a destroyer bunk because help was too far away. The doctor made a decision. McCool would not wait 17 hours. He would be evacuated now. Air transport. Guam. Surgery. The doctor left the medical bay and remembered the main radio was still down from earlier battle damage. Nothing was simple in this war. He found the communications officer on the bridge and explained the situation. Immediate evacuation was essential. The charts came out. Nearest airfield with medical evacuation capability, i.e. Shima, 43 miles west. They could request a PBY flying ambulance, but authorization might take 6 hours. McCool didn't have 6 hours. The destroyer's commanding officer made the call. Cassin Young would break radar picket duty and run for IE Shima at flank speed. 38 knots. 90 minutes. The order violated standing doctrine. Picket ships did not abandon station. But the captain had read McCool's report, had seen the Porter rescue, had heard what happened on LCS 122. Some rules could be bent. Cassin Young came about at 0915 and surged forward at full power. The medical officer stayed with McCool. The chest tube continued draining. Fever climbed to 103. Delirium set in. McCool murmured names. His crew, the Porter, fragments of memory. At IE Shima, a PBY Catalina was already waiting. Stretcher. Plasma. 2 flight corpsmen. The transfer was smooth. Calm seas again. Luck. One last time. McCool reached shore at 10:47. An ambulance raced him to the airfield. Every bump reopened wounds. Fresh blood soaked the bandages. The chest tube tugged painfully. The PBY lifted off at 11:20. For hours to Guam. 2 hours into the flight, McCool crashed. Blood pressure, 50/30. Heart rhythm irregular. Breathing shallow. The flight surgeon prepared epinephrine and atropine. Back at Okinawa, LCS 122 limped toward anchorage under escort. Fires were finally extinguished after 18 hours of nonstop effort. The crew worked in silence. Their captain was dying somewhere over the Pacific. The fleet knew. Ships radioed for updates. The story had already spread. Porter rescue, picket duty, flames, rockets, a lieutenant who refused to leave. At 13:32, the PBY was still 90 minutes from Guam. McCool's vitals remained critical. Plasma flowed. Medications followed. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused. He tried to speak. No words came out, only blood. The flight surgeon wiped it away and watched McCool's eyes close again. He checked his watch. 90 minutes to Guam. 90 minutes to surgery. 90 minutes McCool might not have. His pulse weakened, 70 beats per minute, then 60, then 50. The carotid artery was barely there beneath the surgeon's fingers. He nodded to the corpsman. Prepare epinephrine. The PBY Catalina touched down at Guam at 15:47. An ambulance was already waiting, engines running. Two surgeons stood beside it. They had been receiving updates throughout the flight. They knew exactly what was coming. Collapsed lung, internal hemorrhage, severe burns, shrapnel wounds, massive blood loss, possible cardiac involvement. No delay, no assessment on the runway. Straight to surgery. Naval Hospital Guam sprawled along Opera Harbor, 12 operating rooms, 50 surgeons, hundreds of nurses. It handled 300 casualties a day, most from Okinawa. McCool was one among many, but his case was the worst they had seen that week. They rolled him into Operating Theater 7 at 16:03. Commander James Harrington, 42, Johns Hopkins trained, 6 months in the Pacific, scrubbed in with 3 other surgeons. He had performed over 200 chest surgeries since January. He looked at McCool's vitals and knew the truth immediately. Blood pressure, 60/35. Heart rate, 140. Respiration, 32, labored. Temperature, 104 degrees. Sepsis had begun. The burns were infected. The lung was failing. Internal bleeding continued somewhere deep inside. General anesthesia would kill him. Harrington made the only decision left. Spinal anesthesia for the abdomen. Local infiltration for the chest. Keep him barely conscious. The surgery began at 16:28. The abdomen came first. Blood pooled immediately, dark, old. The source was the liver. A shrapnel fragment had torn into the right lobe, 3 centimeters deep. It still oozed. Harrington packed the wound, applied pressure, waited. The bleeding slowed. He sutured carefully and reinforced the repair. The liver would heal, if infection didn't take it first. A second fragment lay near the spine, too close to major vessels, too dangerous to remove. He left it. Better scar tissue than paralysis or death. The chest surgery took longer. They drained over a liter of blood and fluid. The lung tissue was bruised, torn in multiple places, one major laceration along the lower lobe. Harrington repaired what he could, knowing the lung would never fully recover. 70% function, maybe less. Enough to live. The burns came last. Dead tissue cut away. Sulfa packed into the wounds. Petroleum gauze layered over third-degree burns covering McCool's right side from shoulder to hip. Skin grafts would come later. Today was about survival. The operation lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Harrington closed at 20:45. McCool's vitals never improved, but they held. Against every probability, he lived. He was moved to intensive care. 12 beds, all occupied. Mostly burn victims. Mostly kamikaze survivors. Nurses rotated constantly, morphine, penicillin, plasma. For 72 hours, McCool hovered on the edge. On June 15th, the fever broke. 104 degrees fell to 99. Blood pressure stabilized, still low, but steady. The lung began to function again. Drainage slowed. Infection retreated. His body fought back. McCool drifted in and out of consciousness for 5 more days. Morphine dreams, flashes of fire, screams, rockets, his crew, the porter, the flames. On June 20th, he woke fully. A nurse stood beside him and smiled. "You're in Guam," she said. "You're alive." She told him about the surgery, the lung, the liver, the burns. She did not tell him about the 12 men who had died. She did not tell him about the Medal of Honor recommendation already moving through channels. She simply told him his crew was asking about him. McCool spent 11 months in hospitals. Guam, Pearl Harbor, Oakland Naval Hospital, for skin graft surgeries. The shrapnel near his spine remained, too dangerous to remove. His right lung never fully recovered. 71% capacity. Enough. LCS 122 survived. After 3 weeks of repair at Okinawa, she returned to duty. New commander. Adjusted crew. Same ship. She survived 7 more kamikaze attacks and lost no additional men. The Battle of Okinawa ended June 22, 1945. 82 days. 12,000 American dead. Nearly 2,000 kamikaze attacks. Small ships like LCS-122 bore the worst of it. McCool's actions on June 10th and 11th became case studies. Damage control, command under fire, crew first leadership. President Harry S. Truman presented him the Medal of Honor on December 18, 1945. McCool said nothing. He stayed in the Navy. Korea, Vietnam. 30 years of service. Retired a captain in 1974. He never gave interviews. Never wrote a memoir. The medal stayed in a drawer. Some memories were too heavy to carry aloud. Richard Miles McCool Jr. died on March 5, 2008, age 86. He was buried at the Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis. Simple headstone. Name, rank, medal. Nothing about the flames. Nothing about the collapsed lung. Nothing about the 300 lives. In 2019, the Navy named a new ship USS Richard M. McCool Jr., LPD, 29. 684 feet of steel. A fitting legacy. The rockets on LCS-122 never detonated. They sat 30 feet from fire for 40 minutes. Sometimes survival comes down to 30 feet. Sometimes it comes down to one man walking into flames when his lung has already collapsed. That is the weight of command. That is the cost of heroism. That is what the Medal of Honor means.